the Blood Guy, and welcome back to another review of a film based on a real-life serial killer. Now, before I get to the review, I just want to say I hope that the audio problem that was in the last video is fixed. I actually did the fact versus fiction breakdown in the second part of this video. I filmed that first. The audio is still kind of screwy in that portion, but I think I fixed it. So if it is, great. If not, I apologize. I'll try screwing around more, see if I can fix it. It might just be the phone, but so yeah, the second half of the video is going to be, it actually cuts in and out from being muffled to loud, so I apologize for that, but hopefully the first half of this video will be fine. But anyway, now getting to the review. This is a film that I actually have already reviewed, so this is another re-review. I think I reviewed this back in 2019, probably around the same time as I did Extremely Wicked. This movie actually kind of reminds me of Extremely Wicked in some ways, but I wanted to re-review this because I wanted to do the formula that I've been doing with like my opinion, summary, then the fact versus fiction breakdown. But also, a lot of time has passed, about 4 years since my review, 6 years since the film's release, and I've kind of been hearing a lot of the reception about this film is actually quite similar to Extremely Wicked. That's actually what reminds me about it. And I kind of wanted to shed some light on that. Now, of course, as you can tell, yes, it's another Dahmer film. At this point, I've reviewed every Jeffrey Dahmer film, at least ones that are actually based on him. But the one I've already reviewed is the 2017 film, My Friend Dahmer, which of course is based on the graphic novel of the same name by Derf Backderf, or John Backderf. Oh yeah. Side note, if the audio is still screwy, my girlfriend did buy me these mics. Sadly, they're for Android, and I have iPhone, so I'm going to look into getting ones that are compatible, so then no matter what, hopefully the audio will be fixed. So just a side note. This is a film that I could not wait for it to come out. I remember when this was announced. I remember when they said that Disney star Ross Lynch was going to star as Dahmer. And this is one I was really looking forward to back when it first came out. I thought it was a very interesting premise. Jeffrey Dahmer in high school, sort of... I thought it was just going to be him in high school, maybe no real direction or kind of angle other than his early years. I wasn't sure how far it was going to go. But the major reception that I've heard, which is very similar to Extremely Wicked, which is also based on kind of a memoir type piece, that Extremely Wicked being Ted Bundy's girlfriend Liz, this being a classmate of Dahmer, is that this movie is pointless, boring, stupid, or not worth the time. Why? Because we don't see any of the murders, which obviously, if you're going into a movie centered around pretty much any serial killer, or especially one that didn't start killing till after high school, why would you expect that there's going to be killings in it? The whole point of the film and the book is to show, it's basically a cautionary tale, kind of to show friends, other students, teachers, faculty, and parents, kind of some warning signs to look out for, but also just sort of, not really a hypothesis, but here's like the writer's theories on things in Jeff's life that could have led him to do what he did. It's quite factual. As far as the book and movie go, there's really not a whole lot that's different from real life. I mean, it's a first-hand account from a classmate, so it's probably going to be more accurate than not. Of course, there are some major scenes that are changed, like the field trip to DC or the whole thing at the doctor's office. But I really enjoyed this film. I've always enjoyed this film. I liked it when it first came out. I liked it when I rewatched it for my first review. I watched it with my girlfriend when we first got together because she hadn't seen it. and watching it just now again for this video, I've always liked it. I think I've liked it more each time I saw it. I would still say Dahmer, the Ryan Murphy Netflix series, is still the best work on Dahmer, at least as far as like a scripted work with actors. If we're talking documentary, I'd probably have to say Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, but I'll get into all that. So it was directed by, and the screenplay was written by a guy named Mark Myers, based on the graphic novel. Stars Ross Lynch, who people know. He was a Disney star for Austin and Ally and teen beach movie films. But it also stars Anne Heche as his mother Joyce, Dallas Roberts as Lionel. We get Alex Wolff from. I know him from as the son from Hereditary. I think a lot of people might also know him from Naked Brothers Band on Nickelodeon, which I did not watch. And I like Alex Wolff. I think some people might say his acting is a bit dry or stiff. I liked him in this. I liked him in Hereditary. There is a movie where he plays the Boston Bomber, which I would really like to see. We also get Tommy Nelson and Vincent Kartheiser, if I pronounce that correctly. I don't know if there's anyone else worth mentioning. The entire cast does a great job. Of course, Ross Lynch is the takeaway, and I'll get into him. I've seen Dallas Roberts in other things. I know he was in some crime shows like Law & Order, I think CSI. He was even in one crime show with Anne Heche. He does really good as Lionel. Anne Heche does really good. She's more of an antagonistic Joyce. I mean, really shows her as being mentally unstable, but it shows her to be the most kind of antagonistic, while Dallas Roberts' version of Lionel is kind of it does show them arguing, but he's a lot more passive. I think he's a lot more like what the book Father Story is like, just very shut off emotionally, very just dismissive of everything. Now, and I think the movie only covers like the end of junior year through June 18th. Spoiler alert, it ends with him picking up his first victim. So that's where the film ends. And I think that works. A lot of people say that we should have seen the first kill. I don't think it was needed. It's just supposed to focus on the warning signs or just the things that could have led Dahmer to what he was going to do. So I think cutting it off at that sort of point of no return of picking up his first victim really works narratively, but it also makes it sort of darkly poetic, more of like a ominous ending. So I'm actually really glad that they didn't show the murder of Stephen Hicks, and he is named Stephen Hicks at the end of this film. Now, I've heard some people criticize the film because it's called My Friend Dahmer, but it's not really from Dirk's point of view. In fact, the friends aren't really in it. The friends don't really have much of a role. I know their role is much bigger in the book, which I actually think the book covers like 6 years worth of time. Can't really tell you much about the friends. Can't really tell you much about Durf or Mike or Neil. I've seen interviews with Durf, where he talks about Mike, Neil, and Kent. There is no Kent in the film. It's just Durf, Mike, Neil, and Dahmer is brought in. Now, I've read somewhere that the names mostly have been changed, like Neil or this other psycho kid named Lloyd Fig, that their names have been changed. But I've seen interviews with Durf when he uses those names as well. They're pretty much all credited by their first name, so I don't know if the Mike is the Mike Kukral, if I pronounce that correctly, from some of the Dahmer documentaries that I've seen, like Fresh Meat or Dahmer on Dahmer, I believe are the ones he was in. It could be him. But yeah, I've heard people criticize the film for it being My Friend Dahmer, but it not really being about the friendship. Like, it doesn't really build up the friendship at all, which that would have been an interesting take if it did show it through Durf's point of view, kind of not see Dahmer's home life or personal life, just kind of see him come and go from the group, and then them notice his antics going from funny and entertaining to dark and disturbing. Because that's really what the movie is. It goes back and forth between his home life. Dahmer's the main character. It's through the point. It's kind of this voyeuristic look. Well, not really, because we kind of do get inside Dahmer's head at points, like we see his fantasies. But his home life, school, and then his private life, like him with the animals, or him watching the jogger, or being in his room with his fantasies. But yeah, the friends aren't really that major of a role, and they don't really seem to be friends with Dahmer, even though I believe they're closer in this than they are in the book. Because in the film, it depicts Dahmer being sort of one of the guys, whereas both in the book and in real life, Durf has said that he had a tight group of friends, that they kind of opened the door to Dahmer a bit because they thought he was amusing, but he wasn't really a member of the group. They found him entertaining, they found him funny, and that's kind of what the movie is. At least with the friendship angle, it shows that they kind of keep him around because when he does his spaz episodes or hurricane drills or whatever, he's funny. They like to cause chaos or disrupt the school. But then when his drinking gets worse, there are scenes in the film where Dahmer's doing kind of disturbing things in front of his friends, and they take notice, but it doesn't carry on throughout the film. Like, there's a scene both in the book and the film where he's Durf, Neil, and Jeff are all fishing. Jeff catches one. They tell him just cut the line and throw it back, but he just stabs it and cuts it open. Says, "I want to know what its insides looked like." They look and act disturbed, but then the movie just carries on like nothing happened. Or when his drinking gets worse, they kind of take notice, but then they kind of continue on. It's not really till the end of the film, like kind of around prom, do they kind of act like they're cutting him off. So yeah, I've heard people criticize it because the name My Friend Dahmer, even though Durf has said they were the only friends he had, even as loose of a term as friends was in real life. Also, I've heard people criticize the film that is similar to Extremely Wicked, how it's supposed to be through the point of view of this friend, as the book is, but there's so much going on with Dahmer with the friend not around, like his home life or his private dark stuff. So how would the friend know? Or, the friend wouldn't be privy to this, so how would the friend know any of this stuff? Well, like Extremely Wicked, a lot of it was written with the public knowledge in mind. Durf started writing this way after Dahmer was arrested, convicted, and killed. So it's a mixture of, what he saw and what Dahmer himself would say in interviews about this period. So it mixes in stuff he saw with stuff that's just general public knowledge. It's not that much of a stretch. And then as far as the killings go, like people, and I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. I mean, if this is not your kind of film, then it's not your kind of film. But to say it's a pointless movie just because there's no killing, I think is a very pointless statement. Because pointless would imply that there's no point to it. But, it is a cautionary tale. It's supposed to show how, the friends who noticed didn't do anything, how the really failed failed grown-ups, how his parents were so consumed with their chaotic life, how the teachers either didn't notice or didn't care about what he was doing, that had he got help or had someone to talk to, maybe it would have helped. So there is a point to it. Not every serial killer film has to be like, you know, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or August Underground or whatever. So, which brings me back to what I've said countless times since I reviewed films on serial killers. I think that's what I call surface level sort of true crime fandom or surface level enthusiasts. Like, yeah, let's just watch it to see Dahmer do Dahmer stuff, not really learn about, this one particular period in Dahmer's life or try to look at the point of view that they're trying to make. Because Extremely Wicked does the same thing. And people say the same thing about that film, that it's pointless. There's no killings, which there is a point to it. And I do think it's done well. It's shot very well. It looks great. It does get stylish at times. Especially during some scenes where it's like up close on Ross Lynch, kind of spinning around, kind of to show the what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like the whirlwind that's going through his head. I'm not going to talk about the differences between the book, the movie, and real life. I'll save that for the second half. But I would say this is one of the better Dahmer films made. I mean, Secret Life, not a good film. Raising Jeffrey Dahmer, not a good film, even though there's a good film in there. Dahmer 2002 is decent. It's kind of a bullet point film. It just kind of chronicles all the main things anybody would find about Dahmer. This, I think, chronicles his high school life and some of the darker, negative aspects of his life in a good cautionary tale way. I would definitely say the biggest part of the film would be the casting. Ross Lynch is awesome as Dahmer. Sure, the glasses and the hair will go a long way, along with the wardrobe. He's not doing an accent like Jeremy Renner did an accent. Of course, Evan Peters did an accent. Ross Lynch isn't really doing an accent, but there is one thing I noticed, and I did read that he watched Dahmer interviews every day to help him get into character. And if you watch how Ross Lynch walks, he always walks with his arms down and his shoulders kind of rolled forward, like his arms in front of him. Exactly how Dahmer carries himself. Like if you go to Stone Phillips or Nancy Glass interviews, when he's walking to his seat, that's exactly how he carries himself. So I think he got the embodiment of Dahmer done very well. They did shoot at Dahmer's childhood Bath, Ohio home, which really helps the atmosphere and the mood of the film very well. They wanted to shoot at Revere High School, but they weren't allowed to. They wanted to shoot at Summit Mall, but they weren't allowed to. So those are different locations. But it definitely adds a dark mood to the film, the fact that it was shot at his childhood home. And yeah, side note, the cast did say that they experienced some weird things turning on and off, getting hit with nausea and anxiety only when they were in the house. So that's also kind of creepy, but it definitely helps that it was shot at the home. And Ross Lynch is the main takeaway. I would say this is a movie similar to Extremely Wicked, which kind of hinges on sort of the gimmick of Zac Efron playing Ted Bundy. This is kind of similar, a gimmick of, young Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't really want to call it the young Sheldon of serial killer movies, but Jeffrey Dahmer in high school and played by some other Disney star. It does kind of have that gimmick to it, but it is done very well. So really think Ross Lynch did a great job. And again, I think it was very smart not to show the killings. Well, obviously, it really could have only showed one, and I'm glad they didn't because that's sort of the cutoff. We have all these things that's leading him down this dark path. That once he finally gets to where that path takes him, that's where the film should cut off. Because I feel like if it showed the murder, it would have undone, or maybe not undone, but I kind of feel like the point would have been lost. The point the film was trying to make, and yeah, and also the whole thing about criticizing it because it's called My Friend Dahmer, but it's not through the point of view of the friend, and you know, especially how could it be when the friend's not around through more than half the film? Because the writer incorporated the public knowledge of Dahmer's life. So there's a lot of the criticism that I think can be debunked very easily. But again, if this isn't your kind of film, I guess it's not your kind of film. I really enjoy it. I think it's one of the better Dahmer films. Quite historically accurate, too. And maybe it doesn't go as deep as it could have. Because there's also scenes where it, excuse me. Throughout most of the film, it kind of just feels like a kid struggling to fit in, and here and there struggling with his, you know, coming to terms with his homosexuality in a very intolerant time and place. The whole thing with it doesn't really feel like a blooming serial killer, except for like a few scenes. Like, we do get the idea, okay, yeah, he's watching this jogger, and then, you know, he goes to the doctor's office to get a physical because he's attracted to the doctor, which didn't happen in real life. So that kind of lays some breadcrumbs, but throughout most of the film, or a good chunk of it, you kind of forget about that, and it really just does feel like a kid who doesn't fit in at school and is kind of ignored at home. So it doesn't really go as dark as it could have, which in a way kind of feels like the blooming serial killer scenes, like when we see him fantasizing about laying with the dead doctor in his bed. It kind of comes out of nowhere. If I had any criticisms, it would have been sort of the arc of the friendships, you know, starting from he's kind of this fun guy to hang out with to being treated like a court jester, only there for their amusement. But, you know, like, hey, Jeff's kind of weird. Maybe we should back off a bit. You know, I think if there was more time devoted to that and more of an arc there, I think that definitely would have helped the film out a lot. But yeah, it's still very well made. It's well shot, very well acted, especially by Rossledge. But the whole cast does do a good job. I really like Dallas Roberts as Lionel. You really made to hate Anne Heche as Joyce. I believe this was a year before her car crash, too. I like Alex Wolff, but I feel like there's really not much of the friends there to really... they kind of don't feel like characters. Say maybe, you know, Durf is definitely sort of the puppet master. Neil is the sympathetic one who feels like, hey, maybe we're going too far with Jeff. But yeah, definitely liked that they didn't show the killings. I think it was done in a very good way. The way it just, he picks up Stephen Hicks, drives off, fade to black, and then through text it tells us what happened. I think that was very smart, and I think it worked to the film's advantage, especially the tone and the mood. There was something else I was going to say. It definitely feels like the 70s. They did do a good job at making it feel like the 1970s, and the fact that they shot at his childhood home really helps the dark, foreboding feel throughout the whole film. The score is pretty ominous, especially at certain points. There is a scene where, you know, he feels compelled to kill this dog. He doesn't, because Dahmer had always said he didn't harm live animals. But that or his final performance at the mall, there's like this dark, ominous music that's kind of symbolic of his mind. I really liked that. So yeah, it didn't bother me that they didn't show the kills. It didn't bother me that it wasn't from the friend's point of view or that it showed things without the friend being there. Again, I understand why it was like that. And I think that makes sense. So if you want to see a well-made film about Dahmer in high school that kind of sheds some uh, attempted light on maybe how he turned out the way he did, it's definitely a good watch. I would also recommend the book. The book is a good read as well, especially if you get the edition with the afterword that points out certain parts of the book, and Durf explains where that inspiration came from in real life. That's definitely interesting. So yeah, as far as well made, well acted, and historically accurate, I would probably put this second. I'd probably say Netflix series, My Friend Dahmer, the Jeremy Renner film, and then towards the bottom would be Secret Life and Raising Jeffrey Dahmer. So, yeah, very good film. I disagree with a lot of the criticisms. I think it's just a whole lot of more surface level serial killer fan crap that really just kind of shows that there's a separation between people that just want to see salacious stuff and people who are actual true crime enthusiasts and want to learn about serial killers, all aspects. So, yeah, very good film. And with that, we'll get into the brief summary and the fact versus fiction breakdown. Jeffrey Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, is one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Between June 1978 and July 19th, 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys, ranging in age from 14 to 33. After being lured to his home, he would drug his victims, strangle them, take Polaroids, practice necrophilia, and then dismember them, keeping body parts around his apartment, such as skulls, whole heads, skeletons, hands, genitalia, and even stored their meat for consumption. His crimes were a gradual progression. He didn't practice necrophilia right away, and he did not engage in cannibalism until his eighth victim, Ernest Miller, and starting with his 11th victim, Errol Lindsay, he would drill into their skulls and pour acid or hot water into their brain, hoping to render them into submissive sex zombies. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee on May 21st, 1960, to chemist Lionel Dahmer and a stay-at-home mother, Joyce. His brother David was born when Jeff was 6. As a child in the Bath Township of Ohio, Jeff was known to be emotionally distant, withdrawn, and only showing interest in collecting and dissecting roadkill and other dead animals. He was a teen alcoholic shortly after realizing he was gay and having no one to talk to about it, and enduring his parents' constant fights. And he was a class clown and graduated high school in 1978. It was that summer Dahmer's parents finally divorced, and he claimed his first victim, 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, who was a hitchhiker. He then had short stints at Ohio State, the Army, and living in Miami, all cut short due to his drinking. From 1981 until 1990, Jeff lived with his grandmother, Catherine, in West Allis, Wisconsin. During this time, Dahmer worked at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, starting in 1985. Then he discovered the gay bars and was soon blacklisted from the gay bathhouses for drugging and leaving the men there after his assault on them. This led to him taking men to hotels, and it was at the Ambassador Hotel he killed his second victim, Stephen Tuomi, on either September 15th or November 20th, depending on the source, of 1987. This is what kicked off his official murder spree. He was arrested for numerous sex-related crimes in 1981 for drunken disorderly conduct, 1982 for indecent exposure at a Wisconsin fair, 1986 for lewd and lascivious behavior for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys, and again in 1988 for luring a 13-year-old to pose for photographs. While living at his grandmother's, he killed 3 more young men.
After moving into the Oxford apartments in 1990, he killed 12 more victims and began his cannibalism and making his macabre abattoir. One of his victims at this time, 13-year-old Laotian boy Konrad Sentasophone, which was on May 27, 1991, was actually the younger brother of the boy Dahmer molested in his 1988 charge. On July 22, 1991, his to-be 18th victim, Tracy Edwards, escaped his apartment and flagged down police. When they got back to apartment 213, they found his Polaroids and a head in the refrigerator, immediately arresting him. This led to a media explosion, and Dahmer became one of the most infamous killers. He was found guilty of 16 of the 17 murders and sentenced to 999 years. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer and fellow inmate Jesse Anderson were beaten to death by another inmate, Christopher Scarver. In the years since his arrest and death, there have been countless documentaries, books, films, and even a comic book made about him. Jeffrey Dahmer-related artifacts have become some of the most sought-after murderabilia.
And so we'll get into the fact versus fiction breakdown of My Friend Dahmer. And since it's based on a graphic novel that is based on a true story, I'll also periodically be saying how the movie differs from the book as well. Even though the two are very, very similar, I did notice a few changes. And there's also some differing accounts about names and such that I read elsewhere about the book. But there are some passages at the end of, where the inspiration for certain parts comes from. So I'll probably get into a little bit of that as well. But the film opens up with Jeff on the school bus, and it kind of throws a few things at us right away. Like, it kind of has the Chainsaw Massacre opening with the dead animal on the road and Jeff looking out the window at it as they go by. The bus passing a jogger, which Dahmer then goes to the back of the bus to watch. So it throws at us dead animals, the jogger, throws us a couple well-known things about Dahmer right off the bat. So then he gets dropped off and shows the jogger going by his house, which is true. That's how Jeff came to know of him. Joyce asks him about tennis, which Jeff did play tennis earlier in school. During the same scene, he's introduced to her interior decorator who has cerebral palsy, which is true. That's where some of his impressions would come from when he would do a Dahmer. Which some people also said that voice he does, he was also mocking Joyce herself. It shows him in his shed dissolving a cat in acid, which he says he gets the acid from Lionel. He gets it from his dad, who's a chemist. Of course, is true. Dahmer and Durf meeting in science class. Apparently, they met in junior high because I think the movie takes place like end of junior year through graduation, whereas I believe My Friend Dahmer covers, I think, like 6 years worth of time. I believe it goes as far. It's been a long time since I've read this book, but I believe it goes further back, like into junior high. I believe they met in junior high, but it also goes years after graduation. So it shows Dahmer and Durf meeting. It does show a fetal pig, like a wet specimen fetal pig in a jar. Shows him taking that home, which in the interview for, I believe it was the one with Stone Phillips, he says he took home a fetal pig. Now, I don't know if he stole it, was given an extra one, or just took the dissected one home. That was never clear, but he did take home a fetal pig. Also shows him talking to a shy kid in the cafeteria about going to a Neil Sedaka concert together. Now, I don't know if this is the same kid that Dahmer was said to have had some kind of brief, intimate fling with when he was like 13, 14. But Dahmer did go to a Neil Sedaka concert, I think, when he was a sophomore. He did go with a friend named Neil. Now, there is a friend in the movie named Neil, and there is a friend in here named Neil. I read that a lot of the names were changed, except for, of course, Dahmer and his family, Durf, Mike,
who I think is based on Mike Kukral, if I pronounce that right, who's been in a few Dahmer documentaries. Neil and Kent are in this. There's also another psycho kid named Lloyd Fig. Now, I don't know if all those names are true, like Kent,
Neil, and Lloyd Fig, but I do know that at the very least, Durf and Mike keep their names. So I don't know if this is the
same kid that he had the
fling with, but he did go to a Neil Sedaka concert. But
the, the movie makes it seem
like he's struggling with his sexuality and no
outlet or way to come to terms with or understand it.
So I doubt it's him.
Though the kid is bullied and called homosexual slurs, so maybe it is.
And he did go to a Neil Sedaka show with a friend named Neil, but I don't know if it's the same kid. And that's another thing about this movie,
which I mentioned earlier. You don't really get to know much of the other kids in the Dahmer fan club. Like, I think I only knew that one of them was named Neil.
By, like, prom.
Towards the end of the movie. Shows Lionel and Joyce's intense arguments. True.
There's several throughout the film.
Lionel even mentions her stay at the mental hospital and her chasing UFOs,
which she was known to do, and she did stay at a mental hospital. Shows him playing in the school band,
though he played clarinet, not trumpet. Not like a nitpick, but just
something I noticed. Lionel attempting to get
Jeff to go out more, do more, be more involved, which is true. He tried to get Jeff more involved in sports. I couldn't find anywhere, and I don't remember if I read it anywhere. I don't know if Lionel tore down the shed or his lab where he would do all his animal experiments, but he does in the film.
Jeff taking an interest into personal fitness, which is true, along with trapping and
killing small vermin, which he always stated he didn't harm living animals, just
he would do stuff with the dead ones. So I think that's just one of the things they put in here to kind of show his disturbed psyche. It does touch
upon a later thing about animals as well. It shows
the birth of
doing a Dahmer, where he would bleed like a sheep,
fake seizures, do the impression of the
interior decorator,
do what was called a hurricane
drill, where he would just run through the halls screaming hurricane drill, and how friends Durf, Neil, and Mike, because again, there's no Kent.
At least in the film, how they take notice, they find him funny. Now, again, as I mentioned,
the book makes it seem more like he was just this funny guy that they would let hang out with them sometimes, but he was never part of the group. The movie does show that he's, like,
part of the gang, almost.
Jeff fishing with Durf and another one of the friends. I think it's the one that's credited as Neil. They tell him to throw it back and cut the line, but he just stabs it a bunch of times to say, I just want to see what its inside
looked like. Now, that is in the book. I tried to
find in the back where exactly that story was, just to get Durf's sort of his own background on it, but I couldn't find it.
But I think that was
just another scene to kind of show the friends that there's
something wrong with him.
But it doesn't really go anywhere because they go right back to hanging out and sort
of almost like nothing's changed after. Which again,
that's another kind of issue with the film is as disturbed as Dahmer shows his friends, it's like they notice, but they don't act like anything's changed.
Except for maybe like the last
spaz attack at the mall, they kind of act differently, which I'll get to that. Goes into how they came up with the idea for Jeff to sneak into all the club photos for the yearbook as a big prank, which is true.
Now, some sources
only mention the National Honor Society photo. That's the one that's always shown, that, and
always shows with his face blacked out.
Now, people involved, like people that went to school with him, say that it was
numerous club photos, but it seems like the National Honor Society
is really the one that always gets mentioned.
So for a while, I thought it was
just that one, but apparently it was a number
of clubs. Jeff starting to
to drink regularly before, during, and after school, which is true. The psycho kid named Lloyd Fig. Again, I don't know if that's his real name, uh, but yeah. Dirk did go on to say that when he heard about Jeff, he was arrested for the murders. Fig was his first.
first guess, which uh, is depicted at the end of the book.
Well, we're introduced to him, but this kid doesn't
Really go very far. It just
shows him as a kid that smokes
pot, tries to sell.
joints, shows off a knife that he stole from his dad, just kind of acts weird.
Uh,
But I think it's also just to go in with the theme of both the book that the movie kind of delves into, which is failed adults. How, whether it's
Dahmer, or whether it's
big, they have all these problems, and adults either don't notice or don't care.
their field trip
To DC, which is true. Now, I've read conflicting reports about Dahmer and his friends meeting
the vice president.
Walter Mondale. I've read that Dahmer did smooth talk his way into getting them an appointment at the White House to interview or talk to Mondale. But I've also read that they just saw the vice president from afar. Uh, I tried finding a definitive answer. I always just got one or the other. Most reports say that, yeah, that did happen, but then a lot of reports say that that's really the main
real big difference in the film. Actually, I
I
think
think I mostly read that they just saw him from afar. So it goes into that, which when Dahmer smooth talks his way on the phone, he says they're from William Dawes High School. Uh, in reality, they went to
Revere High School, but they weren't allowed.
allowed to film there, and I guess they weren't allowed to use the name either. So they shot at some other school, came up with the name.
Dawes High School.
So yeah, that's
That's why it's a different school. When he comes back,
for the field trip. Lionel picks him up and says that he's moved out of the house and into a hotel, which is true. It was towards the end of his senior year.
I don't know if it was directly after the DC trip. Now,
The scene at the doctor's office, this is something that I'm also pretty sure never happened because we find out throughout several scenes of the jogger that he's been watching, which of course anyone that's read about Dahmer knows about the jogger.
they
Give him
they actually make him a character. He's this doctor named
of Dr. Matthews, this guy, and so Dahmer makes an appointment.
for him.
He gets a physical. He does his physical, and when it comes to having to
Pull his underwear down.
turn his head and cough, obviously it's not shown, but we get the idea that Dahmer got an erection, and the doctor then acts really
Repulsed
and disgusted. And
scene. Now, one
I've never seen the jogger be identified. I've never heard of an incident where Dahmer made a doctor's appointment with a doctor he thought was attractive just to do that. So I think this is just something
else that they put in there. I think they just made the jogger another
trying to expand.
that sort of character of fantasy for Jeff. But also, I think just
to show the stigma of homosexuality in the 70s, because
I mean, he's a doctor.
he's a pediatrician.
You think he would tell him that, oh,
This is normal, or like, oh, do you have feelings for men? And
try to offer someone.
what to talk to, but he just acts really disgusted by it. So I'm guessing it's just another way to show how Jeff felt that he couldn't, come out, or that he was alone, had no one to talk to about it. I think ultimately that's what they were going for.
Uh,
Shows him
hitting trees with a stick or a bat, which is
true. He was known to do that. We do get a couple scenes of that. His growing fantasies of laying with a dead body, true. We get this
through fake outs with him like pacing around his bedroom. Then we see the dead doctor in his bed, which he lays
with, and
a
then
quick cut to him laying in his bed by himself. So to show that his fantasies are growing, his increased
alcoholism starting to be noticed by friends at school. True. Uh, Also, they do the scene where he's going to do his
final spasm.
performance at the mall. If the friends are acting like they noticed his drinking
He's out of control. He's not
not the same fun Dahmer anymore. This is actually now kind of disturbing. Some of the
other friends are acting that
that way. It's presented that way, like a lot of close-ups, camera spinning. It is stylish, mainly showing Jeff.
in a state like this isn't fun anymore. I always remember it as
This being a scene of just him
being used by his friends, which uh, I guess if you read interviews with Durf or read the book, that is
kind of how it feels. But all, I don't know if he did a final performance at the mall, but he did
they would raise hell at the
a
Summit Mall.
which I think was just outside Akron in a place called Fairlawn. Again, they weren't allowed to film there, so they filmed at the abandoned
Euclid Mall and like the Cleveland.
area, which was actually tore down shortly after this. And I also don't know if he ever made it a point to tell his friends to call him Jeffrey.
Instead of Jeff, like he does in this scene. I'm thinking
That's just a way to kind of show that like Jeff is gone and this new darker persona has kind
to
of
take it over, or that he feels like a different person. Joyce tells
Jeff that the divorce is final. Lionel got the house and she got David, but she has to go to grandma's for a while. By grandma's, her mother, not Catherine. When in real life the divorce wasn't finalized until July of '78. This is still before graduation.
she did get David, but I always read
That she got the house, which is why Jeff was by himself for weeks because Lionel wasn't allowed at the house, even though he eventually
he eventually did get the house and moved into it with Sherry. Which Sherry is mentioned at the end of the film, but only as
my dad's new girlfriend.
shows him waiting in
The bushes for the jogger, bat in hand, ready to enact on his fantasies, but
the jogger never shows. True.
shows a
Young boy and a girl.
coming across a gutted dog, nailed to a tree with its head on a stick. This is true. Dahmer later went on to say that he did do that. He thought it would
Be a fun prank. Now, according to him,
The dog was already dead. He found it. And
some people have said
said that they found like smaller animals and even some pets nailed to trees and stumps. Dahmer never came out to say that that was true, but people kind of suspected that it was probably him. Even Lionel, even
in very recent interviews, says that he's still not 100%
convinced that Jeff
didn't kill the dog. But I always
believe that Dahmer maintained that he never killed live animals or harmed live animals. I do believe that he found the dog. But that is a famous story with the head being found on a stick.
which it also according
To Durf, the accounts of who found it varies. Apparently it was two young neighbor kids, as the film shows, like two very young siblings, brother and sister.
I also read that it was
With a young couple, but even Durf says that it
varies from a source to source who actually found it. Alludes to pets being missing and found. He asks and takes a
freshman girl named Bridget to the prom, and she accepts, which is true. She was actually a sophomore. Her name was Bridget Geiger. She said in an interview shortly after
his arrest in '91.
that he
Well, first, it shows him being very awkward
It does show him just up and leaving
and going to a fast food place
to get a
cheeseburger. The film doesn't show him.
going back to the prom. It just cuts to like sometime later.
In real life, he did go back.
Back to the prom. And she said in an interview that he was terrified of girls, terrified she was going to kiss him, was very
Very awkward. In the film,
It does show that. It also doesn't show that after prom he invited her to a party at his house, where she said there was no food,
no music, 6 or 7 kids there, no one talking.
She called it a nerd party, and when some kid suggested calling Lucifer, she got freaked out and left. So the
The film doesn't show that.
it ends right after the him sitting in his
Car.
eating a burger.
Joyce leaving.
Before graduation, true. It shows graduation. Lionel hands Jeff the keys to
The family car, which is true.
I tried to look to see what kind of car it was because I've seen things like in this. It kind of makes it look like a more station wagony car. Other things I've seen, it was more of like a station wagon type car. But I've also read, and it appears in this as a old Volkswagen Beetle. So in this and in some sources says
Beetle. I tried to look up.
exactly, and every time I looked it up, it just gave me Ted Bundy's Beetle. So Durf says he's going to Pittsburgh for art classes, which he actually went to Ohio State for a semester, dropped out, and then went back to Ohio State and graduated.
But Dahmer even asked,
If he's going to Ohio State, and Durf corrects him and says he's going to Pittsburgh.
because this is a scene where
Durf is driving down the road. It's nighttime. Jeff's walking by himself, so he offers him a ride. Goes to the house, which by this time is empty. And
they have a little conversation.
Jeff's acting very creepy.
Uh,
It is kind of expanded on because I guess as it happened in real life and as is depicted in the book, it wasn't actually Durf that did this because Durf says he never saw Dahmer again after graduation, even though they both went to Ohio State for.
I think Dahmer was there for 1 semester. So it was actually
Mike told him this story. It was actually him that gave Dahmer a ride, dropped him off at the house, and that was the last time any of them saw him.
But
So yeah, according to the story in the book, Mike just pulled up to the house, dropped him off. Whereas in the movie, they kind of have this back and forth. Durf kind of apologizes for kind of using him as like a court jester. Dahmer says 1 beer and all is forgiven. They go in the house. He starts acting creepy, like coming right up behind him.
he goes to leave. Dahmer kind of walks
Out behind him with a bat, just stands there in the headlights. He peels off.
off. So I think that was
Was added for dramatic effect, but apparently it was Mike that did this instead of
Durf. And so then the final scene,
Is
it shows Jeff waking up.
he goes for a drive. He sees a shirtless hitchhiker, picks him up, says he's on the way back from a rock concert. He
Gets in and introduces himself as Stephen Hicks. And then they just drive off into the distance as we fade to black.
Then we get end text. Also, Stephen Hicks was on his way to.
A rock concert, not from. And Dahmer had
Given him the incentive, like,
hey, do you want to come smoke and drink, and I'll give you a ride to the concert later? And that was kind of the incentive for him to get in the car. So, slight difference. But,
anyone that's read anything
about Dahmer, they know.
the name Stephen Hicks.
So, right then, we all know what's going to happen.
But it fades to black. And we get the text on June 18th, 1978.
Stephen Hicks went back to Jeffrey Dahmer's
Home.
then fades away, then it just comes back. He was never seen again. And then it says, in July 1991,
Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested and confessed to murdering 17 young
men. And that
is My Friend Dahmer, which true date, it was June 18th, 78.
which I still
Maintain that was the perfect ending because
this really is the cautionary tale. It's everything potentially and hypothetically
stuff in Dahmer's life that led to that point, sort of to the point of no return, where
he could have done all this stuff, but
once
what
he killed Stephen Hicks, that's it. Now he's a killer. His life will never be the same.
so plus it makes it more
More darkly poetic.
ominous to just end with everything we've seen of him in that movie or in this movie. We all know what's going to happen.
I mean, we know it's been building up. Of course, we know the name
Stephen
Stephen
Hicks. I know people say that
We should have seen
the murder, but I feel like that
that would have kind of killed the impact. Um, I think it also would have just killed the theme of the film,
film, which is
cautionary tale, but also failed adults. Not seeing the warning signs, not acting on the warning signs. So I do find that to be the perfect ending. I especially
narratively, it really
made sense, but I also thought it was very fitting. I don't think we needed to see
uh, this.
Dahmer kill Stephen Hicks in this film.
So that is my
Fred Dahmer, very well acted, especially from Ross Lynch, who did a great job as young Dahmer. Of course, Dallas Roberts. I feel like
it definitely does focus so much
on Ross Lynch as Dahmer that as good as everyone else is, with the exception of maybe Durf, no one's really given a whole lot to do. Like, you can't really say much about the rest of the friends, but I know a number of films have tried to make Dahmer kind of sympathetic.
I would say
This one,
makes him the most sympathetic. It is probably the only one that's really deserving of making him sympathetic. Like, it does suck the stuff
that he went through,
as a teen or as a kid that could mess
anybody up. I mean,
it wasn't as horrific as other serial killers, but
and I think that's also a good reason why it ends when it does, because that's when the sympathy ends.
you can sympathize with everything
He went through up until he actually acts on his fantasies.
it is
Very close to the book. Very little is changed from the book, which
therefore it's
very close to real life. The only real changes would have been
possibly
the trip to DC,
and the doctor's appointment.
Other than that, it's just really tiny things.
Like I said, playing trumpet instead of clarinet, just small things like that. But yeah, Ross Lynch is
Definitely a portrayal of Dahmer not to be forgotten. It is beautifully shot. It's stylish when it needs to be.
it doesn't
get too artsy or or anything
like that.
And it's just a very well-made cautionary tale. So yeah, I've always enjoyed My Friend Dahmer. It is kind of aggravating to hear the surface level people say that this movie's pointless
or stupid or boring because we don't see the kills. It's him in high school. Like, what do you expect? And yes, narratively, it makes sense to end when he picks up the hitchhiker. Because also, in interviews, I think specifically, I think he says it most Stone Phillips and Nancy Glass, that
he debated
pick him up or continue driving, and he always wished that he kept driving. So, again, perfect point to end the film. So, I've always enjoyed
this film. I do think this is one of the better made Dahmer films. Of course, nothing will beat the Ryan Murphy series,
but this is up there. So I do have a
couple more Dahmer pieces to review. They're documentaries. I've now done every film based on Dahmer. No, I'm not doing novelty films like Dahmer versus Gacy. But I've done all the films. I've done that one twice. So, yeah, there's just a couple more documentaries I want to do, and then I'll move on from Dahmer. So stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.